Greetings and felicitations, lords and ladies of the interwebs. My name's Alan Gallant, as usual. I think it's been that for quite some time. I'm coming to you live on tape from the Collinsport Inn, right here in the Chris Jennings Memorial Hotel Room in downtown Collinsport, Maine. Now, I got this weird little item that I found here. Let me see if I can show it to you here. It's one of them old cassette tapes. Well, I ain't seen one of these in a long time. Just so happens I found it in a closet along with this here, this little tape player. And I'm going to try to play this here for you and for me at the same time. And let's find out what we've got here. It's got something written on it here. It says Diabolos mixtape. Okay, let's find out what kind of mixtape we're dealing with here. Gotta get it in there straight. There we go. All right, let's turn it on, see what happens.
I call upon the flame to summon you. I call on all the dark creatures of nature to summon you here to me. Winds of fire, rise. Hear me as I call to you. Rise from the curling flame.
It don't sound like no mixtape to me.
I summon you in the name of the seven plagues, and in the name of the charred and blackened stars that reigned at my beginning.
I think I better turn that off. Yeah, I think I'm going to turn that off. There we go.
You have summoned me. Why?
Summon you? Oh, geez, no. I was just playing this here little mixtape. You must be Diabolos, eh? No, I didn't summon you. All a mistake, promise. I'm just here in the Collinsport Inn playing around with some stuff I found in a closet. Must belong to you. Sorry.
Then my best infernal advice to you is to get on with episode 9.
Yes, sir, Mr. Diabolos. Again, I apologize profusely for any disturbance I might have caused you, but like you say, on with episode 9, part 2 of 16 Magazine's coverage of Dark Shadows. Part 2 includes 1970 and a smattering of 1971. We'll also talk a little bit more about Gloria Stavers, the editor-in-chief of said 16 Magazine and 16 Spec. Let's roll the opening credits! Welcome to Collinsport After Dark. This is a Dark Shadows podcast with your host, Alan Gallant, and of course the whole host of things that go bump in the night. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the latest episode of Collinsport After Dark.
This is an ABC color presentation.
Well then, I suppose we ought to get on with it, shouldn't we? Well, again, as I said before, this here's Alan Gallant, and I would like to welcome you to episode 9 of Collinsport After Dark. And we got a few more miles to cover here in terms of Miss Stavers and 16 Magazine's coverage of Dark Shadows back in the glorious day, or the Gloria day, if you might say. We've got some lovely, ooh, anybody know who that is? That's Michael Cole from the Mod Squad. Anyway, this is the January issue, and you can see off to the side there underneath the 16 Magazine masthead, it says Selby, Frid, Hennessy, Briscoe, Stroker, Davis. Would you dare to be alone with them? You can well imagine. It's a fluff piece, but so what? We're talking about 12-year-old girls in general and a few 10-year-old boys like myself. Anyway, we've got all these lovely magazines here as part of my collection. And in a few minutes, we'll just have to have one of our little visual Primrose Path musical forays there to show you some of the visual images from 16 Magazine and 16 Spec from 1970 and 71. Trivia question about Miss Gloria Stavers, editor-in-chief. Did you know what she did after she left 16 Magazine in 1975 after about 18 years on the job? Some of you might know, some of you might not. She pursued a lot of spiritual exploration, and she ended up being a meditation coach, a kind of a sensei, if you will. And she did that for a number of years. She looked into writing some books and so on, but sadly, she died in 1983. She was not a heavy smoker, but she did have lung cancer, unfortunately, and did smoke a little bit. Almost everybody did back in the 50s and 60s, of course. But she left an indelible mark on the rock and roll world of rock journalism, even though most people considered her magazine something of fluff. But her way of dealing with the stars and her access to them and her ear to her readers was unparalleled. She had great responsibility towards those young girls and boys that were, particularly young girls, of course, target audience there. But she had a particular eye and ear towards them and listened to what they had to say in their letters that were sent by the truckloads to the offices in downtown New York City of 16 Magazine. Again, 16 Magazine was not too far from the studios of Dark Shadow, Studio 16, over on West 53rd. The 16 offices were closer to downtown, and but it was an easy cab ride over there. And so Gloria did visit the studio quite a few times, or had a photographer go over, although she was a photographer herself. And so there's a lot of original shots in the magazine, obviously. And she treated everybody well on the pages of the magazine, and they treated her well. Dan Curtis knew that she was a real help to the ratings, and so their relationship was positively symbiotic, I guess you'd say. When Miss Stavers finally passed away in 1983, she was only in her mid-50s. She was born in 1927, so she was around 55 years old when she passed away. And Rolling Stone, which is not a magazine that typically held the young teen magazines in great esteem, published an obituary. And it was a glowing tribute to her pioneering of rock journalism. Jan Wenner actually, when he was starting out in 1967, and he was just starting the publishing of Rolling Stone, he asked Gloria for any advice and any tips that she might give, and she did. She gave him some valuable tips on organization and how to, kind of run the office and so on, and how to treat the celebrities, and and although they were come from different places journalistically, they benefited from each other. And Gloria actually could be quite generous, although she had a reputation of being no nonsense, and she'd yell at people if she didn't think they were doing what they were supposed to. But her generosity was well known in the industry. She kept Jan Wenner and his then wife in quarters because that's how much each promotional copy of the first few Rolling Stones would cost. You'd mail in a quarter and they'd send you a copy of the magazine. And Gloria Stavers put that in her 16 magazine and said, you can send off to this address here and get this brand new magazine for 25 cents called Rolling Stone. And Wenner was eternally grateful for her generosity in doing that. And as I said, it kind of helped get them through some of those lean months, starting out a publication that later became a giant in the industry. So there's a little more information about Gloria Stavers and what she was like as a person as well as what she was like as an editor. And with that being said, let's continue into our exploration of 16 Magazine and 16 Spec, 1970 and 71, with our little musical montage that we normally use. So, Mr. Music, if you're ready, take us away. Well, there you go. I mean, as you can see, there's still a lot of action going on in the pages of 16 magazine in 1970 and into 71, and I didn't even show everything. I did get about 85% of everything, probably. 1971, of course, everything was starting to be on the wane, and by the middle of the year, the show was long canceled, and the magazine announced that, and it wouldn't be the last time that Dark Shadows was referred to in the pages, but it would be near the last time. What with the movie Night of Dark Shadows coming out a little bit later on, there were a few more blurbs about that film before Gloria Stavers just sort of closed up shop on Dark Shadows and continued on with David Cassidy and Bobby Sherman and the Osmond brothers, and on that went. As times changed and the tastes of the young girls changed, Gloria Stavers changed with the times as well. But Dark Shadows had an excellent run in the pages of 16 and 16 spec. Now let's go into a little bit of detail about some of the entries, and let's begin with the January issue. 16 magazine by 1970 had pushed towards the youth movement of the stars of the show, and here we see David Selby on the cover. Frid would still be featured in many of the issues, but not as prominently as some of the younger stars. Ooh, it's Dreamsville, and here we have David Selby giving away some wonderful prizes, and we also have David Hennessy doing the same, making phone calls to fans and sending off goodies. And here is a Gloria Stavers photograph of David Selby with his top-to-toe vital statistics. And that picture was taken sometime in 1969 during the 1897 storyline. And we have My Life in Pics by David Selby, bringing him up to date to his college years. Whole True Story of Dark Shadows continues, and we see a picture of Frid and also of Laura Parker in their aged look. Dark Shadows Letters is fast becoming a new feature of the magazine and will continue through 1970. And then there's the real guys between those far out faces of Dark Shadows. And there's a really nice 3-color shot here of Jonathan Frid and also Dawn Briscoe in their wonderfulness there. And then black and white shots. We've got Selby and Stroka, both in and out of character. And here we have Hennessy and Roger Davis, both in and out of character as well. And here's the February issue of 16 magazine featuring Quentin Quits and a picture of Quentin on the cover. Also, for your edification, these scans from the first 5 issues of 1970 come from a website called Darkness Falls, which is now defunct, I believe, which was handled by a Dark Shadows fan named Arashi. And here's February's key article, Quentin Quits. Of course, he doesn't really quit Dark Shadows. It's just about what happens when he quits for the day and he goes home to have a bit of time to himself. And of course, on we go with the Whole True Story of Dark Shadows. They're a little bit behind because obviously they're talking about Cassandra or Cassangelique here. And in spite of being on the cusp of 1970, the Whole True Story is still in 1968. Ooh, The Things I Hate and the Things I Love by David Selby. As you can see, he's prominently featured in this February issue. And here's a nice 3-color shot of David, probably from late 69, early 70. And David Hennessy, not to be outdone, answers 40 intimate questions, one of the classic features of 16 magazine. And here's a little picture of him from 1897. And here's the March cover, and you see David Selby, 3 dreamboats down on the cover. And of course, in Dreamsville now we're starting to see Michael Stroker to come to prominence in many of the features here as our youth movement continues. Here's David Selby, an Aquarian, according to this. I guess he was born on February 5th, 1941, I believe. Finally, here's David again, answering some Dark Shadows letters for the fans of the show. And here's the Sweetheart of the Month, which is Don Briscoe in all of his incarnations. There's Chris Jennings, Tom Jennings, Tim Shaw, and apparently the bad boy to beat all bad boys, Alex Stevens as the werewolf. Here we see Dark Shadows, their midnight haunts. Oh, here's Frid again. Don't see a lot of him, but you're still seeing some with David Selby. And then, of course, David Hennessy. I'm sure that he was haunting a lot of midnights at the age of 14. Ooh, and meet 2 new Dark Shadows dreamboats, Christopher Burnell and Chris Panic. Now to be promoted within the pages of 16 magazine, along with all the others. And the April 1970 16 magazine cover finds Chris Panic looks like he's in danger of being sliced to ribbons by a skating bear. Oh my. All-Star Birthday and Gift Guide means that Don Briscoe is right up there with the biggest stars of pop of his day. Here's also Joan Bennett, who was also an April birthday there. And in Dreamsville, hey, there's our friend Frid again, and he's giving away, looks like a signed script to some lucky fan of 16. Here's Whole True Story of Dark Shadows, and under the gossip section we see Michael Maitland, who was briefly on the show. And this is the chronicling of the I Am an American parade in Baltimore, Maryland, which took place in 1969 and featured David Selby. And here's Selby and Frid in our favorite picks. And here's David Hennessy and his mother Jean Avery, and a shot of him as Jameson Collins in the 1897 story. Here's some of our other wonderful stars, including Stroka and Panic, and also Roger Davis is there, and others. And Dark Shadows Letters this month features Michael Maitland. And finally, on the back cover, our favorite DS picks are on page 44. We just saw them. That's Selby and Panic. Here's a classic scene from episode 950, which was recorded on January 27th and broadcast February 13th, 1970.
I think we've met before Collinsport. Where, Mr. Collins? When?
The only place we could have met is the one place I've never been, Jeb. Hell.
Oh, you think that's where I've been?
That's where your ideas come from.
Oh, maybe I can whip up a few special ones for you.
Oh, you'll try. I'm very sure of that. But you let me tell you something. I have learned to take care of myself.
For quite a long time, I imagine. You don't believe the sad story of Philip Todd, do you?
Never.
Why don't you try and clear it?
I'm going to.
You won't make him change his confession.
Do you want to make a bet on that, Mr. Hawks?
And the May 1970 cover features our own David Hennessy. David Selby presents this month's Super Dream, a tape recorder and a soundtrack LP. And here we see David Hennessy with a pair of British Invasion glasses on with a gift package of his own. Here's Selby and Panic again, being strongly featured as we progress into 1970. Ooh, it's Selby and Panic, the girls we love. Back to the Whole True Story of Dark Shadows, and we've also got a feature of Jeffrey Scott. And finally, David Hennessy's Love Test for all you Hennessy enthusiasts out there. And a back cover featuring an 1897 shot. And June is busting out all over with 16 magazine, but alas, no pictures of any of our heroes from DS. Whole True Story of Dark Shadows, which also features a little blurb on Lisa Richards. The actual Whole True Story is still quagmired in late 68, early 69. 16's All-Star Birthday and Gift Guide featuring Mike Stroka. And Marie Wallace is also in there as well. And here are the cribbed answers to David Hennessy's love test from last month's issue of 16 magazine, so now you can cheat. Our Secret Date Books by Selby, Pennick, and Frid. Frid's back in the fray again. Good to see you there, Jonathan. And My Life in Pics by Michael Stroka, a classic feature of 16 magazine honoring Mike Stroka Part 1. Now here's a clip featuring Mike Stroka as Bruno from episode 942, recorded January 15th and broadcast February 3rd, 1970. Take note of Bruno's less than poofy hair for all of you aficionados of Dark Shadows hairstyles.
What's your name?
Bruno?
Mine is Jabez Hawks.
I know that. I also know other things about you.
Well, I don't know if I like that.
Why not? Oh, you don't trust me despite my ring.
Anyone can wear a Naga ring.
Well, that's true. Why don't you give me a try? Give me a job to do. You'll trust me after that. I promise you.
It's easy to talk trust.
See, you've heard that before, huh? You're, suspicious of people who talk a good game, but whose actions you have to worry about. Is that it?
Catch on fast, don't you?
Look, just point one out to me, and that'll be the end of them.
July 1970, and once again, Dark Shadows fans must endure the sacrilege of no pictures of DS heroes on the cover. And here's the whole true story of Dark Shadows. We're still kind of enmeshed in 1968, long year. And there's a little feature on Jerry Lacey. And here's part 2 of My Life in Pics by Michael Stroka. We're getting into his acting career at this point and up and out of his formative years. Here's our All-Star Birthday and Gift Guides, and the 3-color honor is bestowed upon Chris Pennick. There's also John Carlin and others. And How to Meet and Get to Know Me by David Hennessy. And then he gets the Frenchie Blanche treatment. A nice little portrait here and a centerfold of David Hennessy. Now, How to Meet and Get to Know David Selby and Jonathan Frid together again, folks. Always nice to see these two. The dynamic duo of Dark Shadows. Spend the summer with the DS gang. Now, we're getting close to summer. It's the July issue, even though it probably came out in May. And, scoop of all scoops, Gloria Stavers' Dark Shadows Goes to the Movies. This probably was one of the first places that you could find out that movie was in the can. And here's My Life in Pics by Mike Stroka again. And now we're deep into his acting career just before Dark Shadows. And Frenchie gives Christopher Pennick the art treatment here. And finally, on the back cover, 16's Gallery of Stars. And it features David Hennessy and David Selby. Here's the September issue, and everybody's starting to think about going back to school within the next month. Dreamsville features Chris Pennick giving away what looks like a portable record player and a cool poster. And in one of the coolest of the cool posters, right next to Whole True Story of Dark Shadows, is DS68 from episode 532/33. And here's My Life in Pics by Mike Stroka. And now we're up to date with his appearance as Aristide on Dark Shadows. October and dang Gloria Stavers hide. There's nothing here but Osmond Brothers and Partridge Family and Michael Cole and, of course, Bobby Sherman. But inside, Adonis of the Month, Mike Stroka, appears in a nice fringed vest. Up to date with the DS Gang talks about the marriage of Chris Pennick and also the DS movie. And finally, pics from 1968 through 1970 adorn this 3-color montage. Last, it's November, and there's still nothing on the cover but Osmonds and partridges. Bah! But inside, the very last installment of the whole true story of Dark Shadows, number 20, in which they wrap everything up to the present day 1970 from 1968. I think the writing is on the wall for Dark Shadows as we're getting closer and closer to the end of the show. But David Hennessy is giving away a bunch of cool stuff, as is Jonathan Frid here in Dreamsville. Now, it's 16's All-Star Birthday Gift Guide. And we've got Louis Edmonds and Nancy Barrett, and of course, Dreamboat David Hennessy. Yep, December shows there's no more covers for DS, as Michael Jackson has now pushed his way into the coverland. Now, Dreamsville features David Selby, who gave away his shirt and a bunch of other cool stuff, and David Hennessy gave away a poster, and among other things, Jonathan Frid gave away an autographed copy of Barnabas Collins in a Funny Vein. So they're still doing a land office business in Dreamsville. Fear not, faithful DSers, we still have 16 Spec from 1970, and in the February issue on the cover, there's David Selby. Dark Shadows, which one is doomed? And here we are. And this is just a little article that explains the disappearances of certain characters and actors and how sometimes they come back and sometimes they don't. And it explains that the movie was using a lot of the actors as well. So it's kind of a cool little article. And here, Dark Shadow Spectacles, little funny vignettes with jokes attached via cartoon balloons. We see a lot of 1897 there. And on the back cover, more 1897 wonderfulness. These are all from the point in time at which Aristide is with the show. And April 1970 Spec features David Selby and Frid, Mystery Girl Tells All. And on the inside cover, you see there's a drawing of Selby there. Now, the Mystery Girl Tells All. The Mystery Girl is Diane Paleota, who is the production secretary at Dark Shadows, a real thing. And she talks about some of the stars in this article. And here's David Selby, a full color pick with also Hennessy and Briscoe. And finally, Jonathan Frid's Other Life. When he was staked on the show and had a month off before he returned, resurrected in 1897, he was off to star at the Little Theater on the Square in Illinois in a production of Dial M for Murder. Now here's a scene from the episode that made this little trip possible and freaked out millions of Dark Shadows fans. It's episode 845, recorded September 11th and broadcast September 19th, 1969. Okay, Gloria Stavers is off my bad list. She's featuring 3 of our DSers on the cover: Selby, Hennessy, and Panic. How we get our thrills. And the inside cover has more stuff from Selby, Panic, and Hennessy, as well as pictures of Frid and Stroka. And David Hennessy invites you to come home with me, and some nice candid pictures of him at home with his cat, etc. And the second installment of Diane Paliotta's Mystery Girl Tells All, where she talks about Frid and Stroka and Davis, and a section of Dark Shadows on the Spectacles page. And finally, David, Selby, Mike Stroka, and Christopher Pennick, How We Get Our Thrills. So the June issue of Spec 1970 was a pretty good issue for Dark Shadows participation. More kudos to Gloria Stavers, as in the August 70 Spec. There is, on the cover, there's the 2 Davids, Selby and Hennessy. We're coming to your town. And it turns out they mean the Dark Shadows movie, which of course has Hennessy in it but doesn't have Selby. Dark Shadows, How to Win Our Love. And here we have Frid, Selby, Hennessy, and Panic, all apparently showing the way. And then finally, another installment of Diane Paliotta's Mystery Girl Tells All. And on this one, there's a whole bunch of people: Grayson Hall, Thayer David, etc., etc. And here on the October Spec 16 magazine, kudos to Gloria for putting the Davids back on, Hennessy and, of course, Selby. And they want you to be their summer love. And here's some spectacles, some more comedic comic balloons associated with pictures from the big movie House of Dark Shadows. And David Hennessy confesses, I'm afraid to go steady. I'm sure that that's much to the relief of his mother at this point. And then this is really cool. Jonathan Frid invites you to come to my house. It's a nice little pictorial showing his apartment and his cool little terrace, which apparently he's growing plants there. And then finally, a picture of David Hennessy on the inside back cover, along with Barry Williams. Now let's look at a clip from episode 1087, which features David Hennessy. It was taped and aired around the time that this spec hit the newsstands. It was taped on August 18th and aired on August 25th, 1970.
David! David, what is it? What's wrong? Tell me. He's been here, hasn't he? He's been in this room. I can feel that he's been here.
Who's been in this room?
You tell me, David.
Nobody's been in this room except for me.
Then why did you scream?
I had a nightmare.
Huh?
A terrible, terrible nightmare.
Tell it to me.
It was about a war.
Don't lie to me, David.
What makes you say that I'm lying? What right have you got?
David, we've always told each other the truth.
I am telling the truth. I had a nightmare.
You had a dream. Was there a man in your dream, David?
Well, lords and ladies, that's a whole heck of a lot of 1970, both regular and spec. But fear not, there's a little bit more pepper for your ragu. We got a little bit of example from 1971. Now, as things wound down for the show, they obviously wound down in the teen magazines as well. But there were still a few significant articles here and there throughout 1971 into the fall of 1971 when the movie Night of Dark Shadows finally came out. And sadly, after that, of course, everything sort of dried up in favor of the Jackson 5 and the Partridge Family and whatnot. Damn their hides. Anyway, here's a few examples of 1971 Spec and 16 magazine. Here's January 1971 16 magazine, and there's virtually nothing about DS on the cover whatsoever, but inside there's a nice graphic which introduces Jim Storm to the cast, as well as showing David Hennessy, David Selby, and Jonathan Frid. Now here's a clip featuring Jim Storm as Gerard Stiles from episode 1100, which was recorded on September 4th and broadcast on September 11th, 1970. Now, here's a spec magazine from March of '71, which has a brief article and picture of the newest heartthrob, Tom Happer, playing Jeremy Grimes. Unfortunately, he was only on for a couple of episodes before they decided to crunch the storyline. However, here's Tom Happer playing Jeremy Grimes in episode 1163 during the 1840 storyline, which was taped on December 3rd and broadcast on December 9th, 1970.
Who's there? I know someone is. Who are you? I asked you, who are you?
Don't be frightened, Carrie.
How do you know my name?
Carrie Stokes, born, 1824.
25.
Father, Amos Stokes. Mother, Martha Bradbury. My father almost married her two once.
Wait a minute. How do you know all about me? Who are you?
Jeremy Grimes, at your service.
Jeremy Grimes? Mordecai Grimes is your father.
Yes, but don't hold it against me.
I do. The things he says.
And here's some hope for March of 1971. The DS has its headline on the cover, Mad Ghoul Strikes, Who's Next? In fact, it's really just an update, ostensibly by David Hennessy, about what's happening with all the Dark Shadows actors, both those still on the show and those who have left the show. 16's All-Star Birthday and Gift Guide, which includes the January birthday of Catherine Lee Scott and the February birthday of David Selby, which would make sense since it's the March issue and it would have been on the newsstands in late January. Here's the July issue of Spec. In the June regular 16 magazine, there was an article called Dark Shadows Finished Forever, and here it's confirmed. In the article, Kiss Us Goodbye, and this is probably the last time you're going to see any of the Dark Shadows floating heads on the cover. And here's the article as it appears. It's basically just a wrap-up about how the show closed down and the last broadcast in April. And among the last of the Dark Shadows articles is in the September issue of 16 Spec for 1971, in which the movie Curse of Dark Shadows is discussed, as the title had not been changed yet to Night of Dark Shadows by the time this went to press. Well, there you have it, the essentials of 16 and 16 Spec through the years of Dark Shadows. Now, before we say goodbye and all, I'd like to give this little dedication to the founder of our little feast, without whom the Dark Shadows might not have been quite as popular among the younger set as it was, and that's Gloria Stavers. And here's the eulogy set forth by Rolling Stone on the occasion of her passing on April 1st, 1983. Gloria Stavers, October 3rd, 1927 to April 1st, 1983. On the surface, 16 magazine was no more than a shallow, dizzy fanzine for teenage girls. It was crammed with bubblegum singers, TV idols, win a dream date contests, and what's your favorite color interviews. What made it something more was Gloria Stavers, its editor, chief writer, and photographer from 1957 to 1974. When she died recently, we lost more than a friend. We also lost America's original pop music writer, the force behind what was at one time the most influential and widely circulated rock publication in America. Stavers had what great magazine editors must have: vision, intelligence, and integrity. And if that seems an unlikely set of virtues to ascribe to a fan magazine editor, ask the kids who read it. Stavers wrote about dreamy sex, hair, clothes, pop stars, and teen idols not as if they were important, but because they were important. 16 was about girls, boys, and crushes. But Gloria, as her friend Danny Goldberg of Modern Records put it, expanded the idea of what a crush could be. It could be Bob Dylan and Lenny Bruce. In 16 and in real life, it often was. Dylan's ex-manager, Albert Grossman, used to play Dylan's albums for Stavers before they were released. And her storied affair with Lenny Bruce ended with perhaps the most unlikely and touching fanzine article ever published, 16's Bruce obituary. Gloria knew everybody, and she was unremittingly perceptive about talent. She was sometimes ahead of the market, but she was never behind it. As a result, she played a key role in an astonishing number of careers, from Rick Nelson's to Rick Springfield's, and numbered among her discoveries David Cassidy of the Partridge Family, Mark Lindsay of Paul Revere and the Raiders, Peter Noone of Herman's Hermits, Bobby Darin, and Jim Morrison of the Doors. It was in the Virgin Islands years ago that Gloria and Denny Doherty ran into a Greenwich Village acquaintance of theirs named John Phillips, and so apparently the Mamas and the Papas were born. Nor was she afraid to push the boundaries of the fan mag. She backed Alice Cooper before it was fashionable to be weird, and she insisted upon extensive coverage of the Jackson 5, even though there had never before been black teen idols. She didn't do this entirely altruistically. Gloria pressed because she was smart enough to see that young girls would become mightily attracted to Alice and to Michael and his brothers. She understood these trends for the best of reasons. She was what we wrote about, said another friend, journalist Lisa Robinson. But a better way of putting it would be to acknowledge that Gloria was who she wrote for. In many ways, she never stopped being a little girl from Goldsboro, North Carolina, wide-eyed, innocent, flirtatious, and subject to crushes herself, living a life she dreamed. As a top New York fashion model in the 50s, she had dated celebrities ranging from Lenny Bruce to Mickey Mantle, and 16 remained her vision of a perfect world, where every teenager's face was blemish-free and each cute boy was looking for something just like you. She loved her readers, the young kids from small towns who were fighting the torments of puberty with 16 as their imagination's guide, and, thanks to her advice column, among other things, their lifeline, too. Each night, Gloria took home a shopping bag or two of mail. She made it a point of honor to read every letter that 16 was sent. She often treated the readers with more politeness and consideration than she did the stars, with whom she could be brusque. Said Danny Fields, a close friend who began as her competitor at Datebook in 1966, do what they do, his boss said, and eventually succeeded her at 16. To Gloria, readers were just as important as stars. There must be thousands of women, many now in middle age, who remember her as vividly as any teenage friend. What they may never know is how beautiful, wise, and challenging she really was. The beauty was literal. She never lost her lithe, model's figure. She had skin gorgeous enough for commercials, and her black hair and piercing eyes lent her an ever-elegant visage. Her wisdom expressed itself through her absolutely voracious reading and her acute sense of knowing what was about to happen next. Such prescience could often be seen in the revealing photographs that she took. Her Rolling Stone cover shot of Jim Morrison, for example, which ran in 1981, remains a classic. 16 was not a hip magazine by any measure, but Gloria was never anything but. She was as much at ease with 10-year-olds as with her friend Baba Ram Das. Gloria was a consummate professional with an unrelenting sense of integrity. She expected the same of others. The hard-nosed magazine editor in the film The Idolmaker was said to be based upon Gloria, but unlike that character, or most others in power in the talent industry, she never took advantage of anyone. Didn't demand such perks as merchandising rights or finder's fees when she made decisive moves for someone's career. Bobby Darin might ring from 1,000 miles away to ask what shirt to wear, and Gloria might tell him, but only because they were friends. For her younger friends, she was that rare person in rock media who asks that you grow up and be complete. She taught all of us hippies a lot by example, said Danny Goldberg, who discovered both mysticism and his first major job through Stavers. If Gloria told me to tuck in my shirt, I would. If my mother did, I wouldn't. My mother didn't know Jim Morrison and Lenny Bruce. She could be competitive, but she was generous too. When Rolling Stone was just a half-dozen issues old, its editor and publisher, Jan Wenner, met Gloria for the first time. She gave him several good organizational ideas and provided a plug in 16 where she told her readers that a sample copy could be obtained for 25 cents. For the next 2 months, we were inundated with envelopes from 12-year-old girls, Wenner remembered. I don't know what any of them made of our magazine, but my wife and I ate off those quarters for quite a while. The gesture was typical of Gloria, and it makes all the more painful that her own life was short. She was only 55 when she died. Yet I don't suppose they could have packed any more into her days than she did. In that, too, she has set for her friends, known and unknown, the best kind of example. Dave Marsh, Rolling Stone, 1983. And that, my friends, concludes episode 9 of Collinsport After Dark. This here's Alan Gallant coming to you from the Chris Jennings Memorial Hotel room at the Collinsport Inn in beautiful downtown Collinsport, Maine. That family up on the hill certainly has given us an awful lot to talk about over the years. And some of what we talked about filled the pages of 16 and 16 Spec in the years from 1968 until 1971. So, thanks for listening again, and we'll see you next time. There's lots more to talk about in terms of Dark Shadows and all the connected devices, magazines, merchandise, and you name it, and we'll be here to do it. Have a good time, folks. I'm certainly going to try myself. Till next time.